Hey there, so today I'm going to be talking about Chicago, Terry Kath experience. So this documentary is about the daughter discovering the legacy of her father, stuff she had no idea. And later on found how famous he was, famous guitar player, famous rock star. Um, so it talks about how from his childhood, his home. So she would go to his childhood home, and talking about, found guitars of his that he had back in the day, like that Fender guitar that you see in that picture right there. And other guitars he had more than one. He had another electric guitar, probably was like a Gibson, probably. Plus he had acoustic guitars. But yeah, he would talk about his childhood growing up when he started playing guitar. It was quite interesting, and it showed like rare footage, like pictures of him when he was a kid. And there was other, famous musicians like Joe Walsh and Eric Clapton talking about Terry Kath. And then it would go on about pretty much like his life growing up until how he got into playing guitar, and that. So he was only, I don't think how old. He was probably 8, 9, 10 or something when he started playing, around that. Very young, I put it that way. Um, and then, around the time he was in high school, playing in a band, and the members of the original members of Chicago talking about his life and stuff like that. And then they would talk about like when he started playing in bars and stuff like that. So him in the something I did not know, a band he played in before Chicago. They were playing at, say, like high school dances. I believe they were playing at high school dances. This would have been back in probably sometime probably in the 60s. Quite a couple years before Chicago formed. So him and the drummer ended up being the drummer of Chicago, the original drummer, Danny Serafini. So them two, him and Terry Kath, were in this other band. I think they were called The Big Thing. I'm trying to think of the name. That might have been the name. I can't quite remember the name of it. I think it might have been that. So they played in that band. And then the other members, played, talking about how the other members of the Chicago, the original members, were playing in other different bands as well. And then that was quite interesting. And then talking about how it became to be how Chicago formed in 1967. I think they probably were in college or university. They were talking about how, and that's when they formed, around that time when they were like in college, university I think they went to. So that was quite interesting. But I found it was quite interesting because they would go to his childhood home, and there was his old guitars. You would see his old guitars from back in the day. Like I said, this guitar right here. He had a Gibson, I believe, acoustic guitar. He had quite a few guitars. Very, very, very interesting. So she pretty much talked about how he got into playing guitar. So he did start, like a lot of those great rock musicians, usually start at a very, very young age, right? Very, very young. So, very, very interesting, I found. If you're a fan of Chicago, this is definitely worth checking out. And they were talking about like about the time when Chicago did first form in 67. And then later on, Peter Cetera, I think it was in 1968, joined the band. Um, and then that was pretty much completed once he joined the band. And then they were thinking about, like this great rock and roll band with trumpets, like horn sections, like with the horns, saxophones, with electric guitar, like rock and roll with that kind of style of jazz fusion with it. Very, very interesting. I found it was. And then I guess one thing I did not know, I guess his brother was in this documentary as well. Did not know he had a brother. Very, very interesting. You know, but yeah, it was great, really great. And the thing I really liked about this documentary, so they're talking about the time when they talk about how Chicago formed, and it showed a picture of them back in '67 of Chicago, and then later on, once they talked about that time when Chicago formed, then they had their music video, like "I'm a Man," and it was like a black and white one because it was from 1969. So they performed "I'm a Man," which they actually covered that song, which I believe they done a better job on that one than the original. I think Spencer Davis Group was the original one that wrote that song, that performed. But I found they'd done a better job on that. Then after that, it goes back to the documentary, and that's the thing I liked about it. They would talk about that, and then it would go into back to the music video, and then back to the documentary. Very, very interesting. So you got to see a lot of performances of Chicago in this documentary right here, which I found was very interesting. And then they also talked about, when around, it would have been probably '68 when they were together for a year. I think it was '68. Probably it was either '68, '69, or 1970, around that time probably, where Jimi Hendrix seen Terry Kath play, and where he told the other members of Chicago that he thought Terry Kath was a better guitarist than he was, and that's telling you something there. But yeah, very interesting. And like I said, the thing I liked was where they went to his old high school and that, and you got to see like pictures of him, what he looked like back then as a kid, first playing guitar, and about, and like I said, which was really interesting, him and the drummer of Chicago, Danny Serafini, were in a band before Chicago. And then later on, yeah, they left that and joined Chicago, and that's how Chicago formed. It was them, and then the other members of Chicago, like Peter Serch, who came later on in I believe it was '68, Walter Parasader, in 1967, Lee Loughnane, James Pankow, and all the other members of Chicago. And they showed a picture of them, and they were known as Chicago Transit Authority. So they thought that, name that Chicago Transit Authority, and then later on, around 1970, they shortened it to Chicago. But yeah, amazing. And like what I liked was about this was they talk about how they formed, and they had a music video, 1969, "I'm a Man," and then it goes right back to the documentary, and then that's what I liked. And you got to see quite a few performances of Chicago in this documentary right here. It was quite interesting. Where went to his old home and got to see his old guitars in this documentary here, which I found was quite interesting. And then it would go to there, and then it go to the next video from 1970 where they performed 25 or 6 to 4 in Tanglewood in 1970, and then later on, then they would talk about the albums they had out. A lot of albums in the '70s, like album after album after album after album. Like every year they produced and had an album out every year. But that's the thing I liked about this. Pretty much talk about his whole life. There's a lot, yeah. And like I liked where it showed his old guitars. You get to see them. Very interesting. And about his whole life, how he got into music, how he got playing guitar and all that. Very, very interesting. And talk about his voice. He sounded like his voice like kind of like this soulful voice. If you know anything about Terry Kath, the old Chicago, I would say the original Chicago, the real Chicago, I would say. But yeah, it's pretty much amazing, amazing documentary. And then at the end, it talks about they got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Took them a long time, but definitely worth it. This is if you're a fan of Chicago, definitely worth checking out for sure. Definitely worth checking out for sure. There's the back. Yeah, it talks about his life and stuff like that, and when he became a father. Amazing. And then talking about he was going to release a solo album, in the works of doing a solo album in '78, but didn't happen. But yeah, it was amazing. What I really liked about it, they would talk about, and then they go into a music video of theirs, and then live performance, and then they go back to the documentary. So you got to see a lot of performances. I really, really enjoyed it. Like I said, they had other musicians like Joe Walsh, Eric Clapton talking about him, and amazing, amazing guitarist. So let me know what you think, and make sure to hit that thumbs up. It's worth checking out, and so grateful for every single one of you supporting this channel. So thank you very, very much for that. I hope you enjoyed it. And also, if you haven't checked it out yet, this one here, Now More Than Ever, The History of Chicago, I also have that on DVD as well. So just type in DVD review Chicago, and it should come up. I did a review on that, so you want to check that one out as well. So thank you very much for every single one of you supporting this channel. Greatly appreciated every single one of you coming over here. So thank you very, very much. If it wasn't for all you people, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. So grateful for every single one of you. So if you've seen this before, let me know what you think of it down below in the comments. If you've seen it before. And also, if you're a fan of Chicago, like the old Chicago, comment down below. Let me know what your favorite album of theirs is, or song. Interesting to find out. And hopefully you enjoyed it. And thanks so much for watching. And bye.